Hey everyone, I am here to share about just some of the insights I gained from my reading of Acts these last couple weeks and how it relates to our readings we've been doing. And I wanted to talk about Acts chapter 6 today. And this is when the disciples choose seven young leaders and they delegate the task of ministering to the Hellenist women who were not being taken care of. And specifically when it comes to our books we've been reading, I think it's always important when you think about being a pastor, church planner, or ministry leader, like not getting distracted from what God has called you to do and what God has called you to be responsible for. And so, kind of diving in, we see in the beginning of verse 1, it says, "In those days when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists were against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution." So, what we see here is that early on in the book of Acts, the church really wanted to care for the poor and those in need. And what was happening here was the Hellenists, who were Greek-speaking Jews, were complaining and saying, "Hey, our widows are being neglected," and so there seemed to be some sort of cultural division that was happening here. And so the apostles, what's cool here is first we see, the apostles actually cared about, the Hellenists and cared about the people in their church and didn't want this conflict to continue. And so they met together and they really prayed and, sought direction. And what they said was in verse 2, "It is not right that we should give up preaching of the word to serve tables." And what I think we can, glean from this is the idea that the disciples knew their responsibility, which was to feed the church through preaching of the word, and they say later on, through making sure they devote themselves to prayer. And I think for us, in being in church settings, it's easy, to get distracted by things. It's easy to get your mind off the course and responsibility God has called you to, and so. We need to be reminded of what God's calling us to do and stick to that. But it is good to care for people in need. And the thing we have to do, which this passage talks about, is raising up leaders. And so what they did was in the next verse there, it says the apostles raised up and appointed 7 men to take on the responsibility of caring for these Hellenist women. And I think, one thing that was cool just through some of the readings we were talking about, it talked a lot about how the importance of team in church planning, and that you really need a team together to lead and delegate and do the responsibilities of the day-to-day grind of the church. And so I think the thing we can learn from this passage is, don't let distractions lead you away from your responsibilities. And then secondly, we need a team. And so we need to raise up leaders around us and trust that God's going to continue to raise up the next generation of leaders to do the work of the ministry in our context and where God has called us to be. And so that's some of the stuff I learned today and in these last few weeks of reading. And so yeah, that's all I got. Thanks, guys.